Hey, welcome back to the Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. As you know, the Fire Break is sponsored by Team Wildfire. We're trying to take the deadly out of wildfire and the property loss too, because, they can be pretty darn bad. But we believe that with new technology and strategies and put a bunch of smart people in one room, I'm not saying I'm necessarily one of them, we could come up with some better answers and meet the needs of the future. That's it. That's okay. There's my plug for the business. Now, let's get on to Vance Taylor. Vance Taylor is my guest today. And Vance is, check this out, he is the chief of the Office of Needs and, I got it wrong already. Look at that. Too many
Super
words. All right, I'm going to
close.
try.
You're
All right.
super
He's
close.
the chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Was I closer?
Crushed it. You crushed it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Feels good to crush it. So, okay, that's a lot of title. And I understand that the longer the title, the more important, influential, and well paid you are. Is 2 out of 3 of those things true?
Probably two, maybe one, but yeah, on a good day, we'll say two.
All right. So, what do you do there, Vance?
So, it's funny about the title because, and I will say, it cost a fortune to print my business cards. And my cards are actually in Braille, just so you know, Steve. So it's a lot of dots, man, to cover all that.
Oh my gosh. I hadn't even thought about that. You must have like a envelope sized business card for that.
So my friend Joe, Xavier, he's the director over at the Department of Rehab, and Joe's blind and can read Braille, and I can't. So I didn't know if the card said what it was supposed to say. So I gave it to Joe. And I was like, what does it say? Like, for a good time, call this guy? Or like, what's this say, right? So Joe takes the card, and a minute later, he's like, man, that's a lot of dots. But apparently it does say what it's supposed to, so that's good.
All right.
So, I always tell people that, while the title is kind of a mouthful, really, the title doesn't matter, right? What matters is kind of who we are and why we exist. And we exist because historically, individuals with access and functional needs, right? So older adults, people with disabilities, have been marginalized from the emergency management process. And that's been really seen in the increase in death and increased human suffering among those populations. And so to get ahead of this issue, California leaned forward and did what California does. And the governor created this Office of Access and Functional Needs and placed at its head a senior level executive appointed by the governor that's directly responsible for doing two things. The mission's basically to identify, hey, what are the needs that all Californians have before, during, and after an event? And then working in partnership with the community and emergency managers to then integrate those needs throughout the way we plan, respond, and recover. And so it's a different approach, but it's one that we've found has been very successful in our state.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure this is an area that, it is now addressed by California and probably not yet addressed by most other states, right? But when
so we're glad to see some other states that they'll have like an access and functional needs coordinator. But right now California is the only state in the country that's set up this way, where there's actually somebody whose portfolio, whose job it is to look at these issues in the room with the governor, in the room with the director, to help inform their decisions.
And so these would be related to things like evacuations and whatnot. Because when I smell the smoke and I get the notification that says evacuate, I can walk to my car, get in my car, drive out, and who knows what. But for people who in a handicap, are handicapped in any way, if you've got one of the stickers on your car, for whatever reason, are you vision impaired, or that would be like them calling me and say, we need you to brush your hair today. It's like, well, it's not that easy.
There's additional considerations there,
There,
right?
there's more to it, right? So how do you fold that variety of unique needs into an evacuation effort or another emergency response?
You actually touched on a really great one, which is alert and warning. And I love that you pointed out that there is a difference, right? Because look, when I get a notification that says that there's a wildfire, you got to evacuate, my neighbor gets it at the same time. The difference is my neighbor probably just throws some stuff in a bag, tosses that bag in the back of her trunk of her car, and then takes off for safety. But as somebody with a disability, maybe I've got to wait, call a care attendant, wait for them to come to my house. Then I got to pack my durable medical equipment and my assistive technology and devices. And then if I can't drive, I need a ride. And if I've got a vehicle, great. If I don't, then I got to wait for paratransit. And paratransit, by the way, typically requires a 12 to 24-hour advance notice in order to come to your house.
Okay.
And so, all of that's time that I don't have.
Right.
And so when we look at alert and warning, we examine this issue and try to figure out, are there ways and strategies that we can use to make sure that people with access and functional considerations get notified, not necessarily only when there's an evacuation order, but maybe in advance of that, right? So maybe because of my access and functional considerations, I get a notification that says, hey, Vance, we're looking at a wildfire. There's not an order in place yet. But if it continues to spread, then you're going to need to leave. So start taking the steps now so you can be ready when that next alert comes in. And maybe I get that and my neighbor doesn't. And so we've looked at...
In your case, it would be implementing the procedures rather than taking the steps, because you physically don't step, right?
That's right. And
Yeah.
so it's trying to make it so that once the order comes through, that I'm then ready to go.
Okay.
As
So
opposed
you
to then
get you want
starting the process.
yeah. So you're asking for a little head start over your neighbor because it's going to take you longer, and it further disadvantages you versus your neighbor because it takes you longer. That's
Right.
you got a lot of packing and this and that to do, and you may need help with the packing, and the mobility issues of getting out, and then where do you go? Will the facility that you end up at require different services to be available to you than your neighbor?
Absolutely. Right. So, people think about physical access, and physical access is great. So if I show up to a shelter, I want to be able to get in.
Right.
Right. But if I show up at a shelter, and let's say I don't have my support network with me, I can't feed myself. So is there going to be someone at that shelter that can assist me with feeding? Or what about people that need assistance with toileting or transferring in and out of a cot? You had, especially after events like Hurricane Katrina, these horrible stories about people with disabilities going to shelters and dwindling on the vine. People that couldn't transfer and there was nobody to assist them, so they soiled themselves. People who couldn't get out of a cot by themselves, and so they got bed sores. And so those experiences spread through the community like a wildfire does. And so what we found in California was people with access emergencies wouldn't go to shelters, right? They wouldn't evacuate. And as a result, a lot of them died in their homes. And so what we've done is we've worked to identify, well, what do you need? Not just to be able to have physical access to the shelter, but what do you need to have programmatic access? And so coming up with things like accessible cots, accessible hand washing stations, accessible portable showers, coming up with volunteers, staff, and individuals from public health that can assist with providing acute levels of medical care. All of that matters and factors in and really determines whether or not somebody's going to do well at a shelter. Somebody with a disability, I don't want to go to a shelter because my home is set up to meet my needs.
Right.
But if I do go to a shelter and I have as positive experiences as anybody can have, right? I mean, shelter is not a vacation, we get it. But if my needs are met, then I'll feel more confident the next time I got to go there. And so what we found is in partnering with Department of Social Services, with Red Cross, with local jurisdictions, and informing them about these issues and working with them to make sure they get resources, that more and more people are having positive experiences. And as a result, more and more people from the community are willing to evacuate. And that leads, of course, to decreased loss of life, which is exactly what we're looking for.
So this, as you described the chain of needs, that it's not just I need to get out of my house. There's a lot more to it, and a lot of different types of specialty care that's required. That's as individual as the people who need it, and so being able to not only leave, but leave with your care plan, be able to transfer that care plan to people who are there with the skills and the equipment that's needed to implement it, is a pretty tall order and not something that most, emergency operation centers think about, in their planning. And it sounds like you've built an amazing model for this that other municipalities could follow and should follow. And you probably could put some legal muscle behind even a requirement that they follow it. So for you to tackle this, what was your inspiration for this? How did you come into this space?
So it's interesting. I'm native Californian. I was diagnosed with muscular dystrophy when I was 7. I've used a power wheelchair for most of my life. And so, with that comes a certain perspective,
Right.
right? I mean, all of us, we've all got lived experience, and that informs the way we look at things. When I go into a room, I'm looking for access, right? Even almost at a subconscious level. Uh, Birthday party, church, friend's house, whatever. Can I get around? Are there steps? Is there a ramp? If you walk, jump, skip, or run into that room, chances are you're not looking for any of those things. And that's okay, right? It's not that one is good and the other is bad. It just means that because we have a different lived experience and a different perspective, we can look at the same thing and see it differently. And so that's been kind of my life experience, right? So I went to college. I then moved to the East Coast. I was on Capitol Hill, and I got into homeland security issues. And Katrina hit. And it was really clear that people who were very well intentioned were coming up with plans for the community, but they were planning with people that had very similar lived experience, right? So you had first responders, right? Former police officers, you had former military, again, well-intentioned, salt of the earth people but none of them really had much experience, if any, with access to virtual needs. And so they're planning without really recognizing that, hey, there's a lot we don't even know we don't know. And so their plans had gaps built into them. And so they'd do things like, hey, let's do a press conference. And they wouldn't think about the fact that some people in the community, this message is going to fall on deaf ears. Right. So there was no interpreter.
Literally, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so, they wouldn't think about that, or they wouldn't think about the fact that when you point to an evacuation map and say, they go here for safety. Well, if you're blind or have low vision, that doesn't mean anything to you. Right. It was stuff like that because of their lack of lived experience and perspective, they didn't know that they were inadvertently marginalizing entire swaths of the community. And so I saw that when I was on Capitol Hill. I saw it in our national policies. I saw it in the legislation that we were pushing, and wanted to do something about that. And so I was fortunate to be able to put in, my 2 cents here and there. Eventually, I left the Hill. I directed security policy at a trade association, and then became a partner at a consulting firm. We specialize in emergency management and homeland security. And then right when I thought, hey, I'm an East Coaster, my phone rang, and I found out that the governor was looking to appoint somebody to serve in this capacity. And I saw it as the culmination of everything I had done personally and professionally. That they were looking for somebody with lived experience, check that box. They were hoping for somebody multicultural, check that box. Bilingual, check that box. Homeland security expert, check the box. Emergency management, check the box. And somebody that wanted to really drive this mission. And so, despite the fact that I loved my job and our house, my kids loved their school, we packed up and we drove 3,000 miles across the country. And within the first month, I was activated for what at the time were the third and fifth worst fires in state history.
Wow.
So it's been a nonstop kind of go since then. But I've worked with some of the best people in the field of emergency management. I've worked with some of the kindest, most well-intentioned people anywhere. And we've partnered in ways that, while many would say are innovative, I would say speak to the fundamental fact that what we do in this area is the most human thing that we do.
Yes.
And because of that, we've had a lot of really great success. And that means a more resilient whole community. And for me, it also means that there's been what I think is wonderful, which is a cultural shift, right, within emergency management, that these aren't things that get thought about afterwards. This is now like on the front of people's minds. And that's wonderful to see.
That must be so satisfying for you to see progress of that magnitude and at that pace, because so many people, struggle with issues that if they can make the minus move of, the tiniest move of the needle in their lifetime, they're doing really well. And yet in such a short time, you've really been able to take your life experience and use that in a way where you're leveraging towards a better experience for lots of people now.
Yeah, we're trying.
Yeah.
For me, it's very personal. I have a lot of friends that I knew growing up with disabilities that have passed away. Also, a lot of people with disabilities who really, for a variety of reasons, couldn't really advocate for themselves. And so it's that thing where, I don't know how I got to be the lucky one, um, to be able to do all the things I've been able to do. But I definitely feel a responsibility, right, to be the voice for people that don't have that voice. And so there's a level of intrinsic satisfaction there, uh, that's very deep and very meaningful. So yeah, it's been good.
I would imagine that I don't know if you know the author Viktor Frankl. He wrote a book called
Yeah,
Man's Search for Meaning, and um, based on his thoughts, I would think that when you have a negative experience, or what other people might perceive as it, you go into a shelter, they don't have the proper access, they don't have the proper facilities. It's not just simply like, oh, Vance is suffering right now. It's Vance is taking notes and learning how this facility needs to be better, not just simply experiencing suffer, right? That it's potentially a constructive experience for you, because through you living through that, you are much better able to inform what the experience of subsequent people will be.
yeah, that's one of the things. California, we're so big, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and it's such a diverse uh, risk environment, um, that there's always something. There's always a flood. There's always a earthquake or a fire or a power outage or whatever.
Yep.
Um, and so as I go up and down the state, we have a lot of opportunity to practice this. And you see sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And to your point, we have to look at, okay, what's working? And when we find that, we push it far and wide. And that becomes the best practice. And we have to have an understanding that just because it's the best practice today doesn't mean we're not going to find a better way to do it tomorrow. But yeah, we've had a lot of opportunity, uh, through a lot of different disasters to kind of figure out what works and what doesn't.
And how close do you feel you are now to,
Hmm.
state of the art? And I know this afternoon or tomorrow it'll be a new state of the art, but
Yeah.
based on what you know that needs to be right now, how close do you feel you are, and what percentage of your population is benefiting from that?
So it's a good question. Um, it's never, we're not in a position to hang that mission accomplished banner yet,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's absolutely a lot more that needs to be done. I'm very proud of what we've achieved, and I'm really just delighted that if you are in California and you've got an access or functional need, that this will be a much more equitable process for you at every turn. Um, but that's not, again, to say that we're there yet, because we're not. I am always frustrated by the fact that, look, it's 2024 and there are still some people who will suffer or die simply because they lack the ability to run for safety. And until we can get that down to zero, we've got more work to do. Um, but I have every reason to feel optimistic about the fact that we're working not just to leverage existing practices, but new technologies to serve as force multipliers for this mission.
Yeah. And it looks like you're looking at the space between those who can't run for safety and those who could run for safety, and how that impacts the difference of their experiences, rather than looking at situations where even if you could run for safety, you can't outrun a 100-mile-an-hour fire,
Yeah,
right? So there are certain circumstances where everyone is equally unable
that's right.
to, right, to, when the tsunami comes in, right, it's for everybody.
That's
Um,
correct. Yeah,
yeah. So
that's one thing we see is that Mother Nature and disasters do not discriminate.
right, but the level at which they impact you, when there is a mediation available, will vary based on, on your physical or sensory or cognitive abilities.
100%.
Yeah.
You know,
So so who's the Vance Taylor of, of Colorado, of New York, of Florida, of Iowa? I mean, how are you replicating yourself into the emergency offices of other states?
so Colorado, Sadie Martinez is over there. She's great.
Okay.
Um, and that's what we've seen is that we've seen that there's a few other states that are leaning forward on this, which is great. Um, what I want to see is every single state to have an Office of Access and Functional Needs. Right? I want every state to say that this is a priority, that this is going to be ingrained within the DNA of our agency, that there's an understanding that this is something that speaks to who we are as a state. This is who we are as individuals. And I think that, in order to really get there, there's going to need to be support on the federal side because the fact is that California is a very well-resourced state, especially when compared to other states uh, that don't have as much people, that don't have as much bandwidth, that don't have as much capability or capacity. And so I would love to see, FEMA or others say, we're going to provide resources to ensure that every state can stand up this type of an office within their Office of Emergency Services. Now, until that happens, we're going to continue to do what we've done, which is anytime we create a guidance, anytime we come up with best practices or develop a blueprint, we create it with the intention that it will be picked up and used by other states and other jurisdictions. We say that when California sneezes, the rest of the country gets a cold. So when we come up with the best practice, we want that to be something that any other state can pick up, that it'll be scalable, and that they'll be able to implement it. And then if they want, we'll help them throughout that process. And so it's been really great to be able to work with, Sadie or Brian Russell in Florida or others to say, hey, we've got these great training courses. Here it is. Here's all the curriculum. And then we'll send our trainers out and teach your folks how to be those trainers. It's been great for us to say we've got a disaster response interpreter program that credentials interpreters to provide accurate information during press conferences. Here, take it and set it up in your state. We've got a FAST team program through our DSS that really looks at sending in people to do cot by cot assessments at shelters to identify and address needs. here's the training, set it up in your own states. And we'll continue to do that. We see ourselves as national leaders in the space, but that comes with a responsibility not to hold it and keep it close to the vest, but to share it with others.
And what they're sharing is really based on love and compassion. And you talked a lot about states and national, and compassion doesn't stop at the border. What's going on internationally? Are there countries that are doing this better than we do, where it's already baked into their DNA? Or are there countries that are looking to what you're doing to begin to implement programs like this in their countries?
One of the things that's been great is because Cal OES is, basically the premier emergency management agency in the world, right? And so it's great to be a part of this team. But with that, we get delegations that come from everywhere in the world. And they come to our state operations center and they want to see what we're doing and tell us how you're doing it. And when we talk to them about access and functional needs, they're leaning forward in their chairs, literally.
I'm literally leaning forward in my chair right now.
And they want to do what we're doing now. What we, I think, take for granted sometimes are things like where we're at culturally. So the ADA's been on the books for over 30 years. Well, a lot of other countries don't have the ADA, right? So think about being in a country that doesn't provide the most basic level of physical access as a standard everywhere, and then try and facilitate a discussion where you're talking about providing physical and programmatic access to a shelter. It's a really big leap. The way that I think about it is, I'm a storyteller, right? So I'll tell you a quick story. So I told you that when we moved here a month later, I got activated.
Yes.
For those fires. Well, the first couple of weeks we were living at my mom's, and then we closed on our house, and I got activated. So I'd come home, and it was late, and open the door, and there were boxes everywhere, and I literally couldn't drive through my house. My wife cleared a little pathway from the front door to our bedroom, and then I'd come home a couple nights later, and there was another path to the living room. And then I'd come home a couple nights later, and there was a path to the kitchen. And eventually I came home, and it was like, oh my gosh, the unpacking fairy showed up and took all these boxes away. And now I can navigate my home. And of course, there's no such thing as the unpacking fairy. It was my wife who was working diligently every day, making incremental progress to eventually get where we needed to be. And that's how I see this mission. Especially when you think about other countries that are starting from a different point. That so long as we can make incremental progress, we will always be frustrated with the fact it's not going as fast as we want. But ultimately, the day will come when there and here will open the door and it'll be the way it should be. We just got to keep at it.
Yeah, right. To reach the standard of good enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me about your wife.
Oh, she's great. Yeah, she gets the gold medal for marriage without a doubt. So she's a native Californian as well. And it was funny because when we first got married, I lived in DC, and our plan was, well, we'll stay here for a year. and then we'll move back to California. And just about a year later, I remember we were talking, and I said, hey, I don't know how to tell you this, but I really get the sense that we should stay here a little bit longer. Would you be open to that? And she said, oh, yeah, I've been thinking that for months. I was just waiting for you to catch up. And that to me is such a perfect example of what my marriage has been. That she gets there first and then waits for me to catch up.
It's pretty
Uh,
universal.
yeah, it's good. And, we've got 2 kids, and that's been wonderful. Uh, both girls. I always thought I wanted boys, and I'm so glad I got girls. Because, you know, when I would come home from work and the girls were little, it was like, Daddy's home, let's do tea parties and story time. Uh, and my friends with sons, they'd come home and it was like, let's drop kick dad, you know. So the different speed, and I'm built more for the one than the other. But now one's 18 and one's 16. Um, and one's out at school. The other one's a junior. So it's a different dynamic. I come on these shows, uh, and it's like, hey, Vance, you're doing cool stuff. And I go home, they're like, Dad's an idiot. You know, um,
That's
I think
universal too.
there's just that thing, right? It's like, it doesn't matter who you are, what you do. It's tough to move that needle for your kids, you know?
Yeah, right. Well, the, when you stop trying to move it, they move it themselves, and that's, I think, the most satisfying thing to see.
Yeah.
Uh, and you've set such an amazing example of a purpose-driven life that I think that no matter how many things your kids might verbally object to about you now, you've taught them that a purpose-driven life is possible, and that it is possible to make a career out of something that you're passionate about, and that is going to really forever impact their lives, hopefully positively. It may add more struggle to it because people who want to get something done struggle towards it, but there's a lot of satisfaction that comes with it too. And I would anticipate in the years to come, you'll see that positive influence uh, coming through them.
I appreciate that. It's been interesting because they've had not just the perspective, of course, of having a parent with a disability, um, which means different things, right? They're doing stuff growing up that their kids probably aren't doing with their parents, right? Um, and some of that maybe isn't fun, and some of it was fun. They love doing wheelies on the back of a wheelchair. Their friends ain't gonna do that.
Right?
Um, but also, they've really grown up in the emergency management space, and so they've been very aware of the level of impact and suffering that other people are experiencing in these events. And so I think that that's helped make them more uh, empathetic or sympathetic and thoughtful in ways that otherwise probably they couldn't have, how else would they've gotten that, so I think in those instances and cases, I think you're right. Um, in other ways, who knows, time will tell.
Yeah, exactly. You tell me about you as a chief. Your title starts with chief, and compared to most people who have a chief title, you seem you know much warmer, approachable, sympathetic, empathetic, and that people who are working under you are there because they're passionate about what you're passionate about, and it seems like all you have to do is provide a framework for them to release their own energy towards the same thing you're working on, rather than having to chief people. What's that experience like for you?
I've got a great team. I've got a great team. And I'm particular about a lot of things. I'm very particular and cautious and conscientious when it comes to bringing people onto the team. Right? You've got to have passion. You've got to have a certain level of professional and educational experience. But if you don't come to the table, not just ready to go full board, but ready to do that with a firm commitment to partnership and inclusion and integration, then you're not the right fit for this team. You want good people who understand that good people can do good things, but good people, when working together, can achieve great things.
Right.
So yeah, I'm really fortunate, and I'm the first to say that you know, based on title or exposure, probably I get more attention. But the reason why we've achieved success isn't because well, it's just Vance Taylor, right? It's because we've got an incredible team, and it's because we work with the best partners you could ever hope to work with.
That is a powerful recipe, right? A leader who's passionate about it, surrounded by people who are passionate and talented, and partnering with capable people, and you move mountains. And those mountains are accessible, by the way. So I was reading the other day about they've developed the mountain wheelchair, and it's treaded.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
It's got two wheels front and two wheels back, and then it's got treads between them, and then the treads can vary to go over topography, and then the chair itself moves independently of the base, so that the chair part stays level even when the wheels,
very
even when the
cool.
treads aren't. We'll have to send some of those out your way, or speak to
Steve,
that
I got to check that
manufacturer.
out. So,
Yeah, it's
I went to school in Utah, and they got mountains out there,
yeah,
and
beautiful
and,
mountains.
and I hiked one of those mountains. My friends as a gift to me on my birthday.
Wow.
Said said Vance, get in your manual chair,
Yep.
and they strapped me into this chair with old neckties, which I'm pretty sure is an ADA standard, but it worked. And they literally, two in the front, two on the side, two on the back, picked up my chair and carried me Pharaoh style up a mountain.
Wow.
And it was the most incredible experience. Definitely one of the most incredible experiences of my life.
Clearly, it touched you. That experience of being carried like a pharaoh
Oh,
led you to expect to be the chief.
let me tell you something. If you get the chance, go Pharaoh style, man. It is the best.
Right?
After that, you'll never be quite as satisfied, I'll tell you.
That's great. I would imagine that anybody who hears this interview would hope that they have a program where they live, on par or shooting towards what you have. What's the best way for people to gain access to those training materials or to reach out to you?
Yeah, so we've got a good website. We've got what we call the AFN library on our website. And it's probably the most comprehensive clearinghouse for AFN specific resources, probably in the world. Um, and by the way, if people
AFN meaning access and functional needs.
yes. And if people, by the way, have resources that they want us to add there, send them over and we'll add them. But you can reach us through the website. You can reach me directly through my email, vance.taylor@caloes.ca.gov. And we are anxious, eager, and happy to support and partner.
Well, I would imagine you're going to get a lot of calls from people because this is a program that really needs to exist everywhere. And, by sheer volume of people, it may not be the most impactful. Um, but in terms of an opportunity to express humanity and caring, it's got to be one of the best in the world. So thank you for taking your own personal experience and turning it into something that will benefit so many thousands of people around the world.
This has been great. I'm a big believer that when we all do better, we all do better, right? Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, if we can find a way to ensure that there's greater access and greater equity
Yeah.
in the emergency management space, that benefits everybody.
Yeah. So what is the ism called of the bias that people have that they don't realize they have when it comes to disability issues? Because we've obviously there's been a lot of talk about this about in race, right? That we have biases that we don't even know we have,
Sure.
um, right? And so, how studied is that?
Ableism is real, right?
Ableism. Okay. Yeah.
And and I think in most instances, at least most instances that I've encountered, it's it's not that people are trying to intentionally marginalize, alienate, or discriminate. It again tends to be more the case that people haven't had exposure. Um, for a long time, even in things like media, there's been a lack of representation. I think for a very long time there was, and oftentimes still is, a stigma that's associated with disability. Um, you know, it's not uncommon for somebody, if my wife and I go out to dinner, for the server to ask my wife, what does he want?
Well, that's
Um,
appropriate because your wife should be telling you what you want, and you
well,
should be happy to.
she does know what I want. That's for sure. Oftentimes better than I know. Uh, but it's a thing of like, well, ask him,
Right. Yep.
you know. Um, and so
It,
again, never intentional, but I think part of our role is to help people see that when we talk about the needs of the whole community, this is not oh, so sad that the people with disabilities, they need so much. No, it's, look, you've got a lot of smart, strong, capable, intelligent people who are navigating and managing very complex life realities.
yes.
What what we need to do is to partner in a way that continues to further independence and enable people to continue to contribute. And we're, I think, as a society, starting to come and accept and understand that more and more. And that's a really good thing.
Well, it is, and across all levels of ability, you've set a pretty high bar. So kudos
Wow.
to you on that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent. I'm going to put a link to the website where people can get more information on AFN, and I really hope that people in emergency offices, around the world access that and start implementing it, because you said this word said, but I said, what a joyful thing to be able to do for other people. So truly
Absolutely.
inspirational getting to chat with you. And thanks so much for coming on the Fire Break today.
Oh, this is great, Steve. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. And
You bet.
thanks for all you're doing.
Absolutely. And I look forward to catching up with you again on the show. This is Vance Taylor from the California Office of Emergency Management, and he's making that whole office accessible and generating accessibility for people who live in the areas under his domain and beyond. So thank you again for that. Well, folks, you've been listening and watching The Fire Break. I'm Steve Wolf. We're sponsored by Team Wildfire. We're looking to take the fatalities and property losses down to nothing. Talk to you soon and take care. We did it, Vance.
Awesome. Thank you,
That
Steve.
was, yeah. I'm so
Good talking to you.
impressed with what you're working on. Yeah. Thank you. You too. Yeah. I find all of my people on LinkedIn.
Oh,
And when,
that's great.
yeah. And so when I saw honestly, I probably spent out of my 13 or 14-hour workday, at least 7 of them are on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
And
that's a
it's
good
based on
resource.
what you said. It's like who you're partnering with and who's in your network that impacts, how much impact you can have. So,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well,
super impressive. So if anything new comes up, you said you've got things coming down the pike
yeah.
in the months, please reach out to me and we'll continue to amplify your message.
Thanks, Steve.